He's a tough guy. Why doesn't he do that? He knows where to find me. But you know what? Lay your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated. Lay your hands off these poor people. They're just trying to live their lives, man. Trying to live their lives, paying their taxes. Been here 10 years. The fear, the horror. The hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with. Tough guy. You know, I don't give a damn. But I care about my community. I care about this community. The hell are they doing? These guys need to grow up. They need to stop. And we need to push back. And I'm sorry to be so clear, but that kind of bloviating is exhausting. So, Tom, arrest me. Let's go.
So tough stuff from the governor of California, and caught in between this war of words, which is a feud that's familiar to so many people who have covered the relationship between Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump, are families, many mixed status families that live here in Los Angeles, meaning an undocumented maybe parent or relative and a young child, or even a teenager or somebody older than that who was born here in this country. The thing is, President Trump and Gavin Newsom have been talking behind the scenes, at least since the beginning of this began. I asked him about a phone conversation that they had on Friday night, and he said that they had a relatively cordial conversation, and this didn't come up. I want to give you a little bit more of what Governor Newsom said about his conversation on Friday night, Mika, with the president. Watch this.
Well, under his executive order, it specifically notes, and under what the DOD did, is they had to coordinate with the governor of the state. They never coordinate with the governor of the state. We talked for almost 20 minutes, and this issue never came up. I mean, I kept trying to talk about L.A. He wanted to talk about all these other issues. We had a very decent conversation.
When was this?
This was late Friday night, I think about 1:30 plus his time.
After the protests had started here?
After the protests, and he never once brought up the National Guard. He's a stone-cold liar. He said he did. Stone-cold liar. Never did. It was a very civil conversation. I've always wanted to approach engagement with the President of the United States in a respectful and responsible way. But there's no working with the President. There's only working for him. And I will never work for Donald Trump. I mean, where's your decency, Mr. President? Stop. Rescind this order. It's illegal and unconstitutional. And I said it. I'll say it again. It's immoral. You're creating the conditions that you claim you're solving, and you're not. And you're putting real people's lives at risk.
So that's what this is really all about, putting real people's lives at risk. And, you know, you've heard reports that there are riots on the streets of Los Angeles. There are certainly there has been civil unrest, reports of looting overnight. But on a wide scale, that is not what's happening across the city of Los Angeles. And I think it's important to emphasize that this is also not what was happening before the National Guard came to Los Angeles. That's the point that Governor Newsom is making, and that's why he has asked and said this morning he's filing a lawsuit, Mika, to get that authority back from the President of the United States and remove the deployment of the National Guard on the streets of Los Angeles, because he's saying that's what's inflammatory here. And caught in the crosshairs are these migrant residents of Los Angeles, many of whom have been here most of their entire lives.
When they spit at people, you know, they spit. That's their new thing. They spit, and worse, you know what they throw at them, right? And when that happens, I have a little statement. They say, they spit, we hit. And I told them, nobody's going to spit on our police officers. Nobody's going to spit on our military, which they do as a common thing. They get up to them this far away, and then they start spitting in their face. That happens, they get hit very hard.
All right, that brings us to our next conversation. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Thank you very much for coming on this morning, focusing on Los Angeles and the Marines that are standing by. What's your take on where this is headed?
Well, I think it's first important to point out that Donald Trump is just not telling the truth. You know, there's been property damage, but these are pretty isolated protests. There's just no doubt that the local law enforcement can handle them. And, you know, we've all listened to Donald Trump's affection for martial law. We've watched him try to destroy our democracy and the rule of law over the last 6 months. And so, of course, it's incredibly concerning to see him threatening a federal takeover here. This is the first time in 60 years that you've had a president deploy the National Guard without a request of the local governor. But it can also be true that everything that's happened in the last 7 days between the fight with Elon Musk and now the deployment of the National Guard is probably also a distraction from the main story, which is that right now Donald Trump is trying to pass probably the most unpopular piece of legislation that he will attempt to move through Congress in his first term. He's going to throw 15 million people off their health care in order to fund a massive tax cut for the wealthy. It's going to add $2 trillion to our deficit. We're probably going to head into a recession. And so I do also think he's probably doing everything he can to try to get the entire political world to be talking about anything other than a piece of legislation that's going to fundamentally change this country. So, yeah, we have to point out the danger of what he's proposing to do in Los Angeles while also keeping our eye on the ball, which is a bill that's going to transform our economy and ruin a lot of lives.
Many things can be true at the same time. Having said that, people are very upset about these ICE raids in Los Angeles for these poor, terrified families. The initial promise was that these deportations would be for criminals only. That's clearly not what's happening here, as they're trying to make certain numbers. What's your message to protesters? And also, what can elected officials do at this point? And your take on how Gavin Newsome is doing?
Well, I mean, my first message is to keep it peaceful. I mean, obviously, this is a moment where we have to be on the streets all over the country to protest what's happening to our immigrant community, but more broadly to protest what's happening to our democracy. This is the most corrupt administration in the history of the country, and we are going to rise to this moment by being out there on the streets. But ultimately, I think the country sees what Donald Trump is trying to do here. He's looking for a fight. There's nothing in what he is doing that is about peace or about restoring order. He's taking a protest that is relatively isolated. People in Los Angeles over the weekend would tell you that 99% of them went about their day, and it was pretty normal because this is not an invasion that has taken over the entire city. And he's trying to turn a protest that is pretty small into something that involves an even bigger confrontation so that he might actually be able to invoke the Insurrection Act. That would be a defining story of the week if he were to do it. And I just don't think, I think we have to make sure that we understand to not take him at his word. He's looking for a fight. He's not trying to calm tensions.
Senator, we'll turn to the bill in just a moment. One last beat on this. Is there any peril you see for Democrats, though, to be dismissive of what is happening there? If there is an image of a burning car, let's say, if there is some violence, even if it's isolated, what are the political risks here? How do you talk about that?
Well, listen, I think you make it clear that we only are for peaceful protest, but I don't think the American public wants martial law. I think the American public knows that local law enforcement can handle these protests. And, what we also have to talk about is that, Donald Trump only cares about protests when they're opposing him. I mean, every single day we should be reminding the American public that there were protesters at the Capitol fighting for Donald Trump to install him in power permanently on January 6th of 2021, who beat the hell out of police officers with metal poles and tasers and are out on the street today. So Donald Trump only cares about quelling violent protest or quelling protest writ large when it's protest against him. That's fundamentally undemocratic. And it's frankly an invitation.
Continue to clash with law enforcement. The protests began on Friday in response to immigration raids. ICE says it arrested 118 people after executing search warrants at multiple locations last week, 44 of whom were taken into custody during Friday's operation. On Saturday, California Governor Gavin Newsome said the situation was under control. This despite clashes being reported. Shortly after, President Trump deployed the National Guard, sending 2,000 members there to intervene. It's the first time in decades this has been done without a request from the governor. And now, Northern Command says 500 Marines are ready to deploy if the situation gets worse. Police have been using tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the crowds. Earlier, demonstrators spilled onto the 101 freeway, causing it to partially shut down. Authorities say at least 56 people have been arrested so far. Let's bring in NBC News political and national correspondent Jacob Soberof, live from Los Angeles, and NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. Now, Jacob, you've been on this developing story all weekend. We heard some of your interviews with Governor Gavin Newsome and the border czar, Tom Homan. What is the latest so far at this hour?
Well, Mika, I want to back up to Friday and talk about how unusual the situation is here in Los Angeles. On Friday morning, here in the LA bureau of NBC News, the first reports started coming in of ICE raids across Los Angeles. And the local news had aerial footage of Bearcat, sort of tactical style vehicles going through the streets of Los Angeles. And that's when those first melees broke out. On Friday night, there was a peaceful protest that then did turn into a bit of a skirmish between federal agents and people who are out there protesting. And that scene repeated itself over the course of the next several days with, of course, the president, against the wishes of Governor Newsome, bringing in the National Guard, exercising Title 10 of the U.S. Code to bring in the National Guard to Los Angeles to protect it. It's very specific, federal property and federal agents that are carrying out these raids. The reason I say it's unusual is that this is not, and Julia can talk about this as well or better than I can, this is not the ordinary way that ICE has operated historically in Los Angeles or across the country. But under this, stated mass deportation program of the Trump administration, you are seeing raids at places like Home Depots, where day laborers are. Those were not targeted enforcement areas on a wide scale under Democratic nor Republican administrations previously, and has so many people on edge here in Los Angeles because we're a majority minority city. There are 50.
This is important to see. And look, I'm going to be honest. I'm not the biggest fan of Gavin Newsome. I'm not. He's far too moderate. He has vetoed really good legislation, as opposed to, say, Governor Walz and Governor Whitmer, who have worked with progressives in the state legislature to pass really good laws. Newsome hasn't always done that. So I am not I'm not a fan of him, and I don't think he should be the next Democratic president. But he is right here. And he is being a damn good governor right now. Certainly better than Trump. I'd pick him over Trump in an election. Let's be clear about that, right? Definitely mark his name in a ballot versus Trump. But the reality is he's standing up for his people. He's standing up for the civil liberty of his people, of the people that elected him. And not just the people that elected him, the people that didn't elect him. Because Newsom, unlike Trump, really does, I think, believe that he's governor for the state of California and not just for the states and or individual people that voted for him. And you can see how the protesters are winning here. Right? Yes, I understand that some of the images, they don't look as peaceful as they could, blah, 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 blah. I get it, whatever. First of all, Donald and his J6 movement has proven that you can have all the bad pictures in the world and still win elections. Let's be clear. But also, the real story here isn't a few people getting a little animated. This real story here is the fundamental violation of civil liberties and of basic human dignity. That's the story here. And that's what Newsom is saying. Look, you can have individual criticisms of protest tactics, but fundamentally, Newsom is saying, my state deserves to be treated with dignity and integrity, and I am willing to be arrested to uphold that. Again, with all my criticisms of Newsom, he's being a good governor today.